Hello and welcome to In Conversation. I'm Dinesh Verma, filling in for Ramesh, who's off this week.
And I'm Sonal Verma. Thank you for having us in your homes today.
Well, Sonal, it's been, believe it or not, over a year since you and I have hosted the show together. So rather than get into all the normal banter about politics and healthcare debate and all that good stuff, I thought we'd talk a little bit about immigration because I don't hear enough about it at home every night. But why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about what's going on the immigration front?
Well, funny you should ask. Of course, immigration is my most favorite subject to discuss. And recently there's been a lot of news about immigration. President Obama is set to introduce some sort of immigration reform package. He's made a mandate for our Congress to do something about reforming our current immigration laws. There is a rally planned for Sunday to try and foster more debate and more talk about immigration reform. And very recently, a bipartisan bill has been introduced by Senators Lugar and Kerry called the Startup Visa Act of 2010. Now, what this is a new type of investor's visa, which the letters will be EB6. We already have an EB5 investor's visa on the books, but this is a slightly different take on the investor visa in that the individual that seeks to enter the United States on the visa needs to secure U.S. funds of $250,000 or more in an investment by a qualified U.S. candidate into their enterprise. If they can secure that funding, they can enter the United States on this visa, the EB6, for a 2-year period of time. Why this bipartisan bill should have significant support is that the ultimate goal is, of course, jobs creation. And, of course, given the current state of the economy, anything that would create jobs would be a boon.
So that's an interesting take. The investor visa, as it currently exists, encourages folks to bring money into the United States. And if I understand this visa, you're actually bringing an idea, but you're hoping that someone from the United States will back that idea with money.
Right. I think what the premise is that your idea is so good, your novelty is so good, that a U.S. investor would want to invest $250,000 into your enterprise. But that doesn't discount what you would yourself bring in. It's just a way to not just use your own money to sort of buy a visa to enter into the United States. It has to be something that's relevant, that would have a long-term effect in the U.S. economy. And by having a U.S. investor, someone that's already rooted in the United States, I think they believe that that would be a long-term goal.
Well, I have to say, given what I've seen happen on the Hill with healthcare especially, and how polarized that debate's become, I really don't see immigration reform going anywhere as an outsider.
Well, there's a lot of talk about, and there's a lot of debate about whether this is the year for comprehensive immigration reform. You know, and I hear it from both sides, you know, as chair-elect of the D.C. chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I hear it from our own association about what their thoughts are, and I hear it from the various political entities about what their thoughts are. And right now, I think it's a 50-50 split between those who believe it can happen and those who believe it's never going to happen this year. I know that there's a lot of momentum, and it's brewing just like it did back in 2007. It is starting to brew right now. We have marches planned. We have ecumenical advocacy days. We have ALA advocacy days. We have various advocacy days that are being organized and taking place on the Hill. The whole month of March is full of this momentum for immigration reform and a discussion about immigration. The charge was led by President Obama earlier in the month. Let's see where it goes. Let's all hope for the best and hope that something that is as fractured as immigration in the United States can somehow find a mend.
Well, let's get all the legal stories out of the way. I wanted to talk a little bit about contracts because I deal with contracts on a daily basis, and people often come to my office and they say, Dinesh, you know, this is my business plan, this is what I'm going to do. Write me an ironclad contract. And I found an article that really struck me because it takes into account trust and how important trust is in all of these contractual relationships. And I think by relying so much on the language and penalizing somebody for doing X, Y, or Z, we forget about the handshake and the important trust factor in a deal. In many Asian countries, a lot of business for years has been done on a handshake. However, here in the United States, we've become accustomed to writing very detailed contracts that try to address every possible angle or issue. And clients come to me all the time and say, Dinesh, here's my business plan, here's what I want to do, here's the service I'm going to offer, write me an ironclad contract so that nothing goes wrong. There's a study that was done by Deepak Malhotra in the Harvard Business Journal. It was published last year, which examined these trust issues in contracts. And they found that, yes, contracts should be used to highlight the major points of a business deal, but when they're too rigid, they often breed mistrust between the parties. And there were a couple of examples cited, such as Warren Buffett making a decision to buy a $1.5 billion company from some Walmart executives on a handshake. And when he was asked about it, he said, look, they promised me that these were the inner workings of the company. It was a handshake. I believe these guys. I know what they're telling me is true. And that's how the deal was done. And similarly, Boeing actually was built by, the company grew on a promise by Pan Am to buy its 747 jets. So you've got these examples of trust being out there in business and contracts being used to reinforce that trust. And I think that's the key component of this that people need to remember. You can't write a contract that addresses every possible angle of a situation, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to trust.
I don't know that we could do away with all of the elements of the contract that are necessary to protect our interests, but I do agree that you can't enter into a contract without having that trust to begin with, because then you're never going to be comfortable with whatever it is. You're going to be suspicious and cynical.
It's all about balance.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. It's all about balance and balancing the trust with whatever you seek to reinforce in the contract. And I think people have forgotten the importance of integrity and trust in business.
Speaking of trust, there's been a groundswell of political action these days. There are new political parties being formed, and there's a lot of discourse about whether or